The video has been viewed 47 million times. It shows a man in a hand-stitched Italian suit sliding a $5 bill across a table at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, where the cheapest appetizer costs $68 and the waiting list for reservations stretches 11 months into the future. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes and flour still dusted beneath her fingernails from her morning shift at a bakery across town, looks at the bill for exactly 4 seconds. What she says next would be printed in 17 languages. What she doesn't know is that the man watching her response had buried 3 wives, built an empire from nothing, and spent the last 40 years searching for something money had never been able to buy him. Her answer that night didn't just change her life, it made Khalid al-Rashid, the 74-year-old oil magnate worth an estimated $31 billion, call his lawyers at 2 in the morning and utter 6 words that would send shockwaves through 3 continents. I need to rewrite my will. The restaurant was called Ephemeral, a name chosen by its French-Japanese ownership to reflect their philosophy that each dining experience should exist as a perfect, unrepeatable moment. It occupied the entire 43rd floor of a building that had no name on its exterior, only an address that those who mattered already knew. The elevator required a key card and a retinal scan. The staff underwent background checks more rigorous than those required for government security clearances. The sommelier had memorized 11,000 wines. The head chef had turned down 3 Michelin stars because he found the inspection process spiritually exhausting. On any given night, the combined net worth of Ephemeral's 18 tables exceeded the GDP of several small nations. Elena Vasquez had worked there for 7 months, though she still felt like an imposter every time she pressed her thumb to the service entrance scanner. She was 26 years old, the daughter of a Mexican father who had died installing air conditioning units in Phoenix summers, and a Ukrainian mother who had cleaned hotel rooms until her knees gave out. Elena had a degree in molecular biology from City College, $63,000 in student debt, and a younger brother with leukemia whose treatments had already consumed the family's savings, their credit, and most of their hope. She worked the breakfast shift at a bakery in Queens from 4 in the morning until 10, then took the subway into Manhattan for the lunch and dinner service at Ephemeral, where her tips on a good night could equal what her mother had made in a month. She slept 4 hours on weekdays, 5 on Saturdays, and spent Sundays at the hospital watching her brother grow thinner while the machines around him grew louder. She had learned to smile, not the customer service smile that most servers perfected, but something deeper, a genuine warmth that seemed to cost her nothing even when it cost her everything. The regulars at Ephemeral requested her by name. She remembered their allergies, their anniversaries, the names of their children and grandchildren. She knew that the tech billionaire at table 7 was going through a divorce he hadn't announced yet. So she never asked about his wife. She knew that the fashion magazine editor at table 12 had relapsed into her eating disorder, so she always plated her meals with extra negative space and never mentioned dessert. She knew that the retired senator at table 3 was showing early signs of dementia, so she gently redirected him when he repeated himself and never made him feel foolish. These were not things she had been trained to do. They were things she could not stop herself from doing. Khalid al-Rashid arrived at 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. He came alone, which was unusual. Men of his wealth typically traveled with entourages, assistants, security details, companions whose job was to laugh at jokes and validate decisions. but Khalid had dismissed his staff in the lobby. He wanted to be anonymous tonight, or as anonymous as a man could be when his face had appeared on the cover of Forbes 11 times. He wore a charcoal suit that had been cut specifically for his body by a tailor in Milan who served only 4 clients and never advertised. His watch was a Patek Philippe Sky Moon Tourbillon, worth approximately $1.4 million, though he had stopped thinking about the cost of things decades ago. His shoes were John Lobb, his cufflinks were his father's, and the weight in his chest was something no amount of money had ever been able to lift. He had buried his first wife in 1986 when she was 32, and their children were 4 and 6. Ovarian cancer. He had been in Dubai closing a deal when she died, and he had never forgiven himself for the 6 hours between her last breath and his arrival at her bedside. His second wife had drowned in 1994, pulled under by a riptide off the coast of their private island while he watched helplessly from the shore. His third wife had simply left in 2003, taking half his fortune and all his remaining capacity for romantic love, leaving behind a note that said only, "You are the loneliest person I have ever met, and I cannot save you from yourself." His children, now grown, had their own empires, their own families, their own carefully managed relationships with a father who had given them everything except the one thing they actually wanted: his presence. He had come to Ephemeral tonight because he was dying. The doctors had found it 3 weeks ago: pancreatic cancer, stage 4, metastasized to the liver. They had given him 4 to 6 months with treatment, 2 to 3 without. He had listened to their prognosis with the same expression he wore when subordinates delivered quarterly reports: attentive, unmoved, already calculating next steps. He had not told his children. He had not told his business partners. He had told only his lawyers, because there was work to be done. $31 billion does not distribute itself. 473 employees across 17 countries do not simply find new employment. A legacy does not write itself into the history books without careful curation. But tonight he did not want to think about death. He wanted only to eat a meal alone, to taste something exquisite, to watch the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows and remember what it felt like to be human before he had become a monument to his own ambition. He wanted, if he was honest with himself, to feel something, anything. The diagnosis had settled into him like sediment, heavy and still, and he had not cried, had not raged, had not done any of the things the grief counselors said were normal. He had simply continued, as he always did, as he always had. Elena approached his table with the menu and a small smile that did not feel performed. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome to Ephemeral. May I start you with something to drink?" He looked at her properly for the first time. She was not beautiful in the way that the women who usually approached him were beautiful. Not polished, not calculated, not weaponized. She was tired. He could see it in the slight shadows beneath her eyes, in the way she shifted her weight slightly to favor her left foot, in the almost imperceptible delay between his question and her smile. She was tired in a way that he recognized, the tiredness of someone carrying more than they could hold. "Water," he said. "Still, and perhaps a recommendation. I have not looked at the menu." Of course, she did not reach for the menu to point at items as most servers did. Instead, she asked, "Are there things you don't eat, or things you're hoping to taste?" It was such a simple question. Such a human question. He had been asked about dietary restrictions thousands of times, but never quite like this. never with the gentle implication that his desires mattered more than the restaurant's offerings. "I want to taste something I will remember," he said. She was quiet for a moment, actually considering his answer rather than immediately launching into the specials. "The omakase," she said finally. "But I'll speak with Chef Tanaka. I'll tell him you want memories, not Instagram." He almost smiled. "Almost? You speak to the chef directly? When it matters." She brought his water, sparkling despite his request because she had noticed the slight tension in his jaw that suggested he was fighting something, and still water feels too much like medicine when you're sick. She did not explain the substitution. She simply placed it before him with a small bowl of house-made crackers that were not on any menu, that the kitchen prepared only for guests who seemed like they needed something to do with their hands. The meal arrived in 11 courses over 2 hours. Each dish was extraordinary, technically perfect, emotionally resonant, designed to evoke specific memories that Chef Tanaka had somehow intuited from Elena's brief conversation with him. There was a soup that tasted like Khalid's mother's kitchen in Riyadh, though he had not thought of that kitchen in 30 years. There was a fish preparation that recalled his honeymoon with his first wife, the small restaurant in Positano where they had eaten outdoors while the sun set over the water. There was a dessert that made him think of his children when they were young, when sugar still felt like magic and the future was infinite. Elena checked on him precisely the right number of times, present without hovering, attentive without intrusive. She refilled his water before he noticed it was empty. She cleared courses with movements so fluid he barely registered the transitions. She did not ask if everything was satisfactory because she could see that it was, and false questions require false answers that diminish the authenticity of experience. By the end of the meal, Khalid had made a decision. It was not a logical decision. He had not achieved his wealth through illogical decisions, but it was the first thing he had felt certain about since the diagnosis. He was going to test her, not cruelly, but deliberately. He wanted to know if what he sensed in her was real or merely professional excellence. He wanted to know if the kindness she radiated was genuine or performed. He wanted to know, in the small time he had left, if people like her actually existed. He asked for the check. The total was $847 before gratuity, which was modest by ephemeral standards. He had ordered no wine, no supplemental courses, no theatrical additions. Elena brought the leather folder with the same quiet grace she had brought everything else. He opened it, reviewed the total, and placed inside it exactly 850, the meal, plus $5. $5 for 2 hours of service, for 11 courses of perfection, for the first genuine human experience he had felt in longer than he could remember. It was, by any measure, an insult, a deliberate, unmistakable slight, the kind of tip that successful men sometimes leave to remind service workers of their place in the hierarchy. The kind of tip that says, "I could give you everything, but I choose to give you nothing because I can." Elena picked up the folder. She opened it. She looked at the $5 bill for exactly 4 seconds. He counted, and in those 4 seconds, he watched her face with the intensity of a man who had built his fortune on reading people, on understanding the microscopic tells that reveal character, on knowing who could be trusted and who could not. Her expression did not change. There was no flash of anger, no tightening of the jaw, no wounded pride in the eyes. There was only a small, quiet pause. The kind of pause a person makes when they are choosing their next words carefully, not because they are angry, but because they understand that this moment matters. She closed the folder. She looked at him directly, not with challenge, but with something softer, something almost like recognition. And then she said the words that would alter the course of both their lives. I hope whatever is troubling you finds peace. Some weights are too heavy to carry alone, and money doesn't make them lighter. She didn't say it with pity. She didn't say it with judgment. She said it with the simple, unadorned compassion of someone who recognized suffering because she had lived inside it, who understood isolation because she had felt it, who knew that wealth without purpose was just a more comfortable prison. Khalid al-Rashid felt something crack inside his chest, not his heart. His heart had calcified decades ago, protected by scar tissue and strategic distance. Something older than that. Something he had forgotten existed. The part of him that had once been a boy in Riyadh, before the oil, before the billions, before the wives and the deaths and the endless, exhausting performance of being someone important. "Why did you say that?" he asked. His voice was hoarse. Elena considered the question with the same thoughtfulness she had given to his dinner order. "Because you've been alone all night, but you keep looking at the empty chairs. Because you didn't taste the food, you studied it, like you were trying to memorize something you knew you'd lose. Because you tipped me $5, and men who can afford this restaurant don't do that unless they're testing something or punishing something. And you don't seem cruel, so I think you're testing. And I think whatever you're looking for, you won't find it in how I react to money." The silence between them stretched. At the surrounding tables, conversations continued. Deals being made, affairs being conducted, reputations being burnished. The city lights glittered beyond the windows, 43 stories of indifferent beauty. Somewhere in Queens, Elena's brother was sleeping in a hospital bed, his body fighting a war it was slowly losing. Somewhere in the files of Khalid's lawyers, $31 billion waited to be assigned to people and causes, to be transformed from numbers into legacy. "What would you do?" Khalid asked slowly. "If I told you that I am dying, and that I have spent 74 years accumulating wealth that has never once made me happy?" Elena did not flinch, did not offer platitudes or false comfort, did not reach for his hand or soften her posture into professional sympathy. She simply said, "I would ask you, what did make you happy before you forgot?" It was the right question, the only question, and he did not have an answer. "Will you sit?" he asked. "Please. I know it's irregular. I know you're working. But I have been looking for something for a very long time, and I think perhaps I have found it in the wrong place, in the wrong person, at the wrong time." Which is exactly how important things usually happen. Elena glanced toward the host station, where her manager was watching with barely concealed concern. A server sitting with a guest was grounds for immediate termination. Ephemeral had standards. Ephemeral had protocols. Ephemeral had a reputation that did not include staff members treating billionaires as equals. "I could lose my job," she said. Not as an excuse, as a fact, a calculation she was making openly, without resentment. "Then I will make certain that doesn't matter." "That's not the point. The point is that you're asking me to risk something that keeps my family alive so that you can satisfy a curiosity. That's a billionaire's request. It costs you nothing and could cost me everything." Khalid absorbed this. In his world, people did not speak to him this way. In his world, every request was granted, every curiosity satisfied, every inconvenience smoothed away by staff whose job was to ensure he never had to consider the cost of his whims to others. But this woman, this exhausted, underpaid, extraordinary woman, was looking at him like a human being, with all the complexity and obligation that implied. "You're right," he said. "Forgive me." She studied him, then made a decision. "I get off in 40 minutes. There's a diner on Lexington, terrible coffee, excellent pie. Meet me there if you want to talk." She left before he could respond. He watched her move through the restaurant, checking on the tech billionaire at table 7, refreshing the water for the fashion editor at table 12, gently guiding the retired senator at table 3 through the dessert menu he had already ordered from twice. She was good at her job. She was more than good. She was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel seen. And he understood suddenly that this was not a skill she had learned, but a quality she had been born with. An abundance of attention, of empathy, of genuine care that overflowed from her despite every reason the world had given her to hoard it for herself. He paid his check, properly this time, with a $5,000 tip that he left in cash so it could not be tracked, and took the elevator to the lobby. His driver was waiting, had been waiting for hours because that was what drivers did when they worked for Khalid al-Rashid. He dismissed the car and walked the 11 blocks to Lexington Avenue in the October cold, feeling the city press against him in a way it hadn't in decades. Street vendors, taxi horns, a homeless man playing saxophone with more skill than half the musicians Khalid had hired for private concerts. The ordinary, extraordinary chaos of 8 million lives intersecting and diverging, each one carrying its own weight of joy and grief. The diner was called Lucky's, though nothing about its cracked vinyl or flickering lights suggested luck. Elena was already there, changed into jeans and a faded CCNY biology depth sweatshirt. Without the professional polish, she looked younger, more tired, more real. "You came," she said. "I almost didn't. Sat in a doorway arguing with myself for 10 minutes. What one?" Dolores, a waitress with kind eyes, took their order. Coffee and cherry pie for both. Khalid couldn't remember the last time he'd ordered something just because someone else was having it. "I think," he said slowly after Dolores had shuffled away, "I came because you didn't need anything from me. Everyone I meet needs something. Investment, approval, access, connection. They calculate what I can do for them, and they perform accordingly. But you looked at a $5 tip from a dying man and offered him compassion. Not because you thought it would benefit you, but because that's who you are. How do you know I'm not performing right now? How do you know this isn't an elaborate long game to get access to your money?" "I don't," he admitted. "But I've spent 50 years reading people. I've been right enough times to build an empire and wrong enough times to bury 3 wives. You're not performing. I would bet everything I have on that." The pie arrived, bright red and glistening, the crust golden and imperfect in a way that Ephemeral's pastry chef would have found offensive. Elena ate hers in small, deliberate bites, savoring it in a way that suggested sweetness was not something she took for granted. Khalid took one bite and felt tears prick his eyes. Not because the pie was good, though it was, but because he had not eaten anything without first considering its nutritional optimization, its sourcing ethics, its alignment with his carefully managed health regimen in longer than he could remember. The pie was just pie, and it was everything. "Tell me about your life," he said. Not the version you tell customers. The real one. So she did. She told him about her father, who had worked himself to death in Phoenix heat because the American dream required a down payment he could never quite gather. She told him about her mother, whose hands had become so arthritic from cleaning that she could no longer braid Elena's hair the way she used to. She told him about her brother, 14 years old and fighting leukemia, whose medical bills had already exceeded $200,000 and showed no signs of stopping. She told him about City College, about the professors who had believed in her, about the research position she had been offered at a lab in Boston that she had turned down because leaving would have meant leaving her family without their primary earner. She told him about the bakery at 4 in the morning, the way flour felt between her fingers, the small joy of watching bread rise. She told him about ephemeral, about the strange intimacy of serving people who had more money than they could spend in 1,000 lifetimes, about the kindnesses she had witnessed and the cruelties, about the quiet dignity of doing difficult work well. She talked for an hour. He listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, without doing any of the things powerful men typically did when confronted with problems they could solve. He simply listened because he understood that this was what she needed. Not rescue, but witness. When she finished, the diner was nearly empty. Dolores had refilled their coffee twice and was now pretending to wipe down a counter that was already clean, clearly curious about the odd pair in the corner booth. "Now you," Elena said. "Tell me about your life. The real one." So he did. He told her about Riyadh, about the small house where he had grown up with 4 siblings and a father who worked on oil rigs and came home smelling like petroleum and exhaustion. He told her about the scholarship to Oxford, about the culture shock of England, about the first time he had seen snow and cried because it was so beautiful and so impossibly far from anything he had known. He told her about his first wife, Fatima, about the way she laughed, about the children they had made together, about standing in a hospital room in Dubai while a machine told him she was gone. He told her about his second wife, Sarah, about the island, about the riptide, about the helplessness of watching someone you love disappear into water you cannot enter. He told her about his third wife, Catherine, about the slow erosion of their marriage, about the note, about the terrible accuracy of her assessment. He told her about his children, now grown, who called on birthdays and holidays but did not know him, not really, because he had never let them close enough to hurt him. He told her about the diagnosis, about the 4 to 6 months, about the $31 billion sitting in accounts and investments and properties around the world, waiting to be transformed into legacy, and about the crushing realization that he did not know what legacy meant anymore. "I have given to charities," he said, "hundreds of millions of dollars, hospitals and universities and arts programs and disaster relief. My name is on buildings I have never entered, and none of it, not $1, has made me feel like I have done something that matters. I have accumulated and distributed and accumulated again, and at the end of it all, I am sitting in a diner with a stranger because she is the first person in decades who has made me feel like a human being instead of a bank account." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city continued its relentless churn. Taxis and buses and pedestrians all moving toward destinations that mattered to someone. "Do you want advice?" she asked. "Or do you want company?" "I don't know." "Both." "Neither. I want—" He stopped, frustrated by his own inability to articulate something he had only just begun to understand. "I want to have done something real." I want to have touched something that will outlast me. I want to die, knowing that my life added to the sum of human goodness, not just human wealth. Then stop giving to buildings, she said. Start giving to people. It was such a simple statement, such an obvious one, but it landed in him like a stone in still water, sending ripples outward to places he had not examined in years. What do you mean? Buildings don't remember you. Endowments don't mourn you. Programs don't sit at your bedside when you're dying. People do. You've spent your whole life accumulating things and distributing things, but when did you last actually know someone? Not employ them, not fund them, know them? He did not have an answer. My brother, she continued, is probably going to die. The doctors don't say it like that. They say prognosis and odds and treatment options. But I can see it in their eyes. He's 14. And he's probably going to die, and there's nothing I can do except be there. Hold his hand. Tell him stupid jokes. Make sure he knows every single day that he is loved. That's all any of us can do. Be there. Love each other. Everything else is just furniture. Khalid al-Rashid, who had negotiated with kings and presidents, who had moved markets with a single phone call, who had built and destroyed companies with the stroke of a pen, sat in a cracked vinyl booth in a diner on Lexington Avenue and let a 26-year-old waitress dismantle everything he thought he knew about legacy. I want to help your brother, he said. No. He blinked. No. I didn't tell you about him so you would offer to help. I told you about him because you asked about my life, and he's my life. If you help him because you feel guilty, or because you want to feel like a good person, or because you're trying to buy your way into meaning, that's not giving. That's taking. You'd be taking my brother's illness and making it about your redemption. Then what do you want? She smiled, and it was the first time he had seen her smile without a customer watching. It transformed her face, made visible the girl she had been before life had pressed so much weight onto her shoulders. I want to finish my pie. I want to go home and sleep for 6 hours before I have to be at the bakery. I want my brother to live, but if he can't, I want him to go gently. I want my mother's hands to stop hurting. I want to someday use my biology degree for something more than remembering which customers have shellfish allergies. She stopped, laughed at herself. I want a lot of things, but wanting isn't the same as expecting. I learned that difference early. They finished their coffee. Khalid paid the check, $23.47, and left Dolores a $100 tip that she tried to refuse and eventually accepted with tears in her eyes. Outside, the October wind had sharpened, carrying the smell of approaching winter. Can I see you again? He asked. Elena considered the question with the same thoughtfulness she gave to everything. Why? Because talking to you is the first thing that has made me feel alive, in longer than I can remember, because I am dying, and I don't want to die surrounded only by lawyers and doctors and staff who are paid to care, because I think you might be able to teach me something I should have learned a long time ago. I work every day. I visit my brother on Sundays. I don't have time for whatever this is. Then I'll come to you, to the bakery, to the hospital, wherever you are. I won't take your time. I'll just be there, if you'll let me. She studied him for a long moment, the strange old man in his $1,000,000 watch and his bespoke suit, standing on a sidewalk in the Upper East Side, asking permission to enter her life. He saw her weighing the risks, calculating the costs, measuring him against every wealthy person who had ever promised something and delivered disappointment. "Okay," she said finally. "Sunday, children's ward at Mount Sinai. 2 o'clock. Bring something for the other kids. Not expensive, just kind. Books, maybe, or puzzles. Things to do when you're stuck in bed." She didn't wait for his response. She walked to the subway entrance, descended the stairs, and disappeared into the city's underground veins. Khalid watched until he could no longer see her, then stood alone on the sidewalk for 10 minutes, feeling the cold press against him, feeling alive in a way he had not felt in decades. That Sunday, he arrived at Mount Sinai with 17 boxes of books, puzzles, and art supplies. Not the expensive kind. He had sent an assistant to a regular bookstore, a regular toy store, with instructions to buy things that looked used, loved, ordinary, things that a child might actually want, not things that announced their cost. Elena met him in the lobby. She did not comment on the boxes, did not thank him, did not make a production of his generosity. She simply said, "This way," and led him to the pediatric oncology ward, where children with no hair and exhausted eyes looked up from their beds with the suspicious hope of those who have learned that visitors sometimes bring disappointment. Her brother's name was Miguel. He was small for 14, shrunken by chemotherapy, but his eyes were sharp and bright and inherited from the same source as Elena's warmth. He looked at Khalid with the unfiltered assessment that only children and the dying are honest enough to offer. "You're the billionaire," he said. It was not a question. "I am." "Elena says you're lonely." "She's right." Miguel considered this. "I'm not lonely. I have too many people around all the time. Nurses and doctors and my mom crying in the hallway. Sometimes I just want everyone to leave so I can be lonely for a while." Khalid laughed. A real laugh, dusty from disuse. "That's very wise." "I'm dying," Miguel said matter-of-factly. "Dying people get wise fast. It's like a bonus." They talked for an hour. Not about illness or money or anything important. About video games and comic books and whether the Mets would ever win another World Series. Khalid discovered that Miguel had a sharp, dark sense of humor and a vocabulary that suggested he read far above his grade level. Elena sat in the corner, watching, not participating, letting whatever was happening happen without interference. When visiting hours ended, Khalid walked out of the hospital into the autumn afternoon and called his lawyers. "I want to establish a foundation," he said. "Not in my name, anonymous, focused on pediatric illness. Not research, not buildings, not programs. Families, direct support. A mother who can't work because she's caring for a sick child. Siblings who need therapy to process what they're watching. Medical bills that insurance won't cover. The gaps. The human gaps. That's not how philanthropy typically," his lawyer began. "I don't care about typical. I care about real." He visited Miguel every Sunday for the next 3 months. He brought books and sat in the hard plastic chair and listened to a dying boy talk about life with more clarity than any CEO or statesman he had ever known. He brought Elena coffee from the cafeteria, terrible coffee that she drank without complaint. He met her mother, whose hands shook when she shook his, and who eventually stopped shaking and started talking, telling him stories about her husband, about Ukraine, about the dreams she had carried across oceans only to watch them sink beneath the weight of American reality. The foundation launched in January. By March, it had distributed $4 million to 300 families. There were no press releases, no galas, no buildings with his name, only checks arriving in mailboxes, weights lifted from shoulders that had been bearing them alone. Miguel died on April 7th at 3:42 in the morning. Elena was holding one hand, their mother the other. Khalid waited in the hallway because he had learned that some moments are not for visitors. Elena emerged at dawn, sat beside him without speaking. He put his arm around her, and they stayed like that while the hospital woke around them. At the funeral, Khalid understood what legacy meant. Not buildings or foundations, the web of connections that remained, the people touched, the lives changed, the love given without expecting return. 2 weeks later, he rewrote his will. His children received their expected inheritances, but the bulk, $23 billion, went to the foundation, with Elena named as director for life. He did not tell her. He continued visiting hospitals, meeting Elena for terrible pie, learning what he should have learned decades ago. That money is just a tool, that the only thing that matters is the quality of attention we give to each other. He died on August 14th at Sloan Kettering. Elena was holding his hand. The last thing he said was her name, then a word in Arabic she did not understand, then nothing. The reading of the will made international news. Oil magnate leaves fortune to waitress, read the headlines, missing the point entirely. He had left his fortune to a woman who showed him that wealth without connection is just a more comfortable loneliness. Elena took the foundation position but kept her bakery job. Still 4 a.m, still flour between her fingers. Her afternoons changed. Meetings with program directors, applications from families carrying weights alone, decisions that changed lives. The foundation's official name was the Miguel Vasquez Foundation for Family Support. Among staff and families, it had another name, the $5 Legacy. The security footage from Ephemeral has been viewed over 50 million times. It shows a man sliding a bill across a table, a woman looking at it for 4 seconds. No audio, but everyone knows the story now. 2 strangers beginning a journey that would redirect $23 billion toward the radical proposition that kindness is the only wealth that appreciates over time. Elena still works at Ephemeral. Sometimes late in the evening, she pauses at table 4, his table, and remembers a dying man who found meaning in the last place he expected. She remembers the Arabic word he spoke at the end. She looked it up later. It meant teacher. The greatest gift was not $23 billion. It was knowing that everyone carries something invisible, that every interaction offers grace, that the $5 we give or withhold can change a life. The foundation continues. The families continue to be served. The legacy grows in quiet, ordinary, extraordinary moments when someone who has nothing offers everything to someone who has everything but needs more. This is the story of a $5 tip. This is what happens when we choose to see each other clearly. The waitress who made a billionaire rewrite his will, not because she wanted his money, but because she gave him something money could never buy. The experience of being seen, being known, being loved without condition. If you've made it to the end, remember the next time you can be kind. Remember the person serving your table carries a weight you cannot see. Remember that generosity is not just about money. It's about attention, presence, the radical act of treating everyone as if they matter. Because they do. Every single one.